The crash of Air India Flight 171 was horrific, which happened on Thursday, June 12th, just 2 days ago as of this video. Everyone but one person were unfortunately killed, including 8 people that were on the ground. It was a Boeing 787 Dreamliner that crashed, which was the first crash from this particular aircraft. And the Dreamliner planes have been in service since 2011, and there's over 1,000 of them in the air on a daily basis around the world. It was just an awful tragedy. And you can go online, social media, you can look up news articles, you can even go on X, which I would strongly recommend against it if you're looking for on the ground post crash footage, because there's a lot of really graphic imagery, because the plane, it traveled less than, I think it was like 45 seconds or something like that from the time it took off to the time it crashed. So, yeah, there's just a lot of victims. I'll just try to put it as lightly as possible. But yeah, there were a lot of people around or who were in the plane who were unfortunately killed. So, yeah, I would advise against it if you're easily bothered by that kind of imagery, because it's around X, and I don't really think they're going to clean it up or anything like that as far as the videos and everything goes, because it's a free speech platform now. So I would be surprised if they did. But anyway, you can go and look up news articles for updates. I actually came across some, which I'll start sharing here. I even got an update from the CEO of Air India, who posted a video earlier today. But starting off with, let's start off with this video here. This video shows the Air India plane crash from someone who was filming from what it looks like to be an apartment. And I'll go ahead and play that now if you haven't seen that yet. Huge fireball. It was traveling from India, I think in the northern part of India, to London, about a 4,000-mile flight that it was prepared for. And of course, it would have been completely topped off with fuel to make such a long journey. And for it to have crashed so soon after takeoff, that explains the enormous fireball, which they cut the video off before you saw the full effect of what that fireball actually looked like. This video is not the original. This was taken from a computer screen that somebody was filming, unfortunately. I tried to find the original. I don't know why it's not that easy to find, but I wasn't having any luck finding it, so maybe you may have better luck than I did. You'd think that a mainstream media publication would have gotten their hands on the original, but you could tell it was on a computer screen that they were filming this particular video from, just by the reflections and all that. But anyway, if you look carefully, right as it was crashing, see there's a piece of debris here that looks like it may have fallen off the plane. I mean, I can't explain where else it could have come from, because it didn't project away from where the crash happened. It kind of looks like it just falls down. So let's see if you can take a look at that. You can see it right there. So let me go back just a little more so you can actually see the plane in view. But yeah, it happens over. So I don't know. I mean, I saw buzz about that online. There's been some quote unquote experts online, YouTubers, who they claim they're pilots and whatnot, and engineers and so forth. And they apparently have seen the same thing that I caught, and they're trying to put that to a possibility as to what may have caused that plane to crash with a piece of debris falling off of it. So not really sure. And again, this only happened 2 days ago, so we're not exactly sure what really caused it to go down. They did pull the black boxes. I believe that happened yesterday. They did recover both black boxes that they're analyzing now. The United States government, we sent a member of the NTSB over. I'm assuming that they've gotten there by now. I don't think they're going to head any kind of investigation, but they're there just to offer support if needed. And I actually do have a clip from President Trump, who is offering our government's full support if India needs it. And he mentioned that India, it's a large country. They've got a lot of things under control. They have an enormous infrastructure, so they they've got this, you know, they could probably handle it. But it was a Boeing aircraft, which is an American company. So that might kind of complicate things as far as the investigation goes. So we'll see where that goes. But anyway, so that was the first video angle. This one is from the airport itself. So you can see the plane taking off here. And this was an airport CCTV camera that caught the takeoff and the immediate descent and eventual crash. And it gets about 600 to 700 feet above the ground right here, and then it starts to sink down. And it continues sinking downward until it eventually crashes. Again, it was up in the air for less than a minute. Something like 40, 45 seconds. Almost like the engines lost power. There's a lot of speculation as to what may have caused it still. A lot of people just throwing out opinions. People were saying the flaps were not working. People are saying that the pilot error may have caused it. Maybe they pulled back on one stick when they were supposed to pull on another one, which caused the landing gear to stay down, and the flaps didn't function the way they were supposed to, which caused the plane to go down. But there was also I can't remember what that thing's called. It's a propeller. It's an emergency propeller that comes out of the bottom of the plane if the aircraft loses power or if it's on essentially emergency standby mode. I think that includes if both engines go out. This little mini propeller comes out of the bottom of the plane. It's supposed to provide emergency power. Well, apparently that had opened up while the plane was in its descent phase. And so there's speculation on why that may have deployed, and it could have been hydraulic pressure. Maybe that's why the flaps didn't extend, and maybe that's what caused the plane to go down. Or maybe just the engines completely malfunctioned. Another theory that I heard was that possibly water may have gotten into the fuel system, and if that were to occur, the water would have separated from the fuel that was in the plane, which could have caused the engines to almost immediately shut down upon takeoff. And the only surviving passenger on the plane, which I'll get to in just a little bit, he claims that he heard a bang right before the plane crashed, and that could possibly be consistent with water being in the fuel system, because as the plane is taking off and the engines are running at full power, inside the fuel tank, if there was water in there, it could have evaporated into a gas or into water vapor, which could have ignited inside the fuel tank, which could have caused a bang. And all of that would have happened like within seconds of the plane actually crashing. So, and that necessarily wouldn't have caused an actual fire explosion. It would have just caused a combustion, like just a bang, without necessarily a fireball before the plane officially crashes. So that's another theory that's being thrown out there as to what may have caused the plane to go down. So anyway, that was the second footage, and I've got a little bit of updates here from Grok, and these updates, they come from airindia.com, so obviously an official source. Reuters, you can take them or leave them, but they are a mainstream news website. BBC.com, The Guardian, AP News, so they're probably just parroting what Air India is releasing. That's what I'm assuming, but these are all the news sources that Grok is pulling from. I figured I'd show that before I read this. And then also 43 posts from different, I'm assuming, mainstream news sources, maybe Air India themselves, which I do have a video from the CEO that I'll play as well. An update that just came out about 8 hours ago, so it's a new update. So anyway, recent updates regarding Air India based on available information currently focus primarily on a tragic incident and related developments. Ahmedabad plane crash. I know I'm saying that wrong. Apologies. I'm terrible with words. Air India flight AI-171, a Boeing 787, which is a Dreamliner from what I've read. It's 787-8 operating from Ahmedabad to London Gatwick, crashed shortly after takeoff, killing 241 of the 242 passengers and crew on board, along with at least 8 people on the ground. The sole survivor, Ramesh, a British national, is recovering in the hospital, and I do have an interview with him. It's a brief interview, but I've got a clip of that too that I'm going to play here in a minute. The crash occurred in a residential area, impacting a medical college hostel. The flight data recorder, the black box, has been recovered, and the investigation is focusing on engine thrust, flaps, and landing gear issues, with no initial evidence pointing to a bird strike. India's aviation regulator, DGCA, has ordered additional safety checks on Air India's Boeing 787 8 and 9 fleet equipped with GE Aerospace GE9X engines, including takeoff parameter checks, electronic engine control tests, and fuel-related checks. The government is considering grounding the 787 fleet, but has not done so yet. So they're still in operation. And there's info for support for the victims if you're so interested. And also the investigation and safety measures, as well as the operational updates. Air India introduced a one-time waiver on rescheduling and cancellation for passengers booked on flights to and from the area where the crash happened between June 12th to 14th of 2025 for tickets issued by June 12th. The airline is completing mandated safety checks on its Boeing 787 fleet, which may cause delays on long-haul routes. And other developments, which include prior to the crash, Air India announced plans to launch daily direct flights between Bengaluru and Kathmandu starting June 1st, 2025, with fares starting at 8,000 rupees. The airline also faced flight cancellations in May 2025 due to India-Pakistan tensions affecting cities like Jammu and Srinagar, and has been impacted by longer flight times due to Pakistan's airspace ban. Air India is also shifting maintenance work from Turkish Technic to other regions amid geopolitical tensions. For further updates, you can check Air India, which I have. Let me just jump over to that right away. So this is Air India's X profile, and this is now it's 9 hours ago. I first found it about an hour ago, but it's only a couple of minutes, so I'll go ahead and play that, make sure the volume's up. Here we go.
Yesterday, I shared that Air India's technical and customer support team had assembled in Ahmedabad. Over 200 trained caregivers are now in place, with each family assigned dedicated assistance along with access to counseling and other services. We will continue to help and support the families however we can. I also updated on my visit to Ahmedabad, where I visited the crash site and met with some of the families of the deceased. This followed a visit a day earlier by Tata Sons and Air India chairman Mr. N. Chandrasekharan, and other members of the Air India management team are now in the city and will remain present for as long as it takes. To provide immediate financial support, Air India will be making an interim payment of 25 lakh rupees, or approximately 21,000 British pounds, to each of the families of the deceased and also to the survivor. This is in addition to the 1 crore rupees, or approximately 85,000 British pounds, already committed by Tata Sons. The process of reuniting next of kin with their loved ones and personal effects has begun. Our teams are working closely with the families and authorities to help the reunification process and, where appropriate, with repatriation. This is an emotional process, and we ask that families be given space. Air India is also in the process of completing precautionary safety checks on Boeing 787 aircraft, as directed by our regulator, the DGCA. We will complete all checks within the timelines prescribed by the regulator. As has been confirmed by the authorities, the aircraft's data recorder has been recovered, which will form part of the official investigation. And Air India continues to fully cooperate with these investigations. At this juncture, I also wish to acknowledge the work done by first responders and those from many organizations since the accident, and also to our crew, who continue to operate with professionalism and with safety, always as their primary responsibility. Thank you.
All right. Yeah, he was, of course, very, very careful with that speech, and of course it was scripted. I mean, I wouldn't expect it any other way. I mean, he has to be very careful, very professional, given the situation, and especially with how graphic it actually ended up being. I mean, it was just absolutely horrible to see that. But it's good to hear that they're paying out family members that way, that they can cover burial costs or funeral costs. I know in a lot of people in India, they handle burials in different ways, like burning on the Ganges and things like that. So I mean, like that's an endeavor just to get their deceased loved ones just to that location. So hopefully they're going to pay them out immediately. That way they're not going to have any issues, delaying in doing that, because I know a lot of people there, they want to get them, cremated usually as soon as they can. But I'm assuming that if Boeing is determined to in any way be at fault, and I also, side note, the engines, I believe I read, were Rolls-Royce engines. So if the engines themselves were faulty in some way or another, or if they were determined to be liable in any way, I'm sure Rolls-Royce will probably be liable too. But at least Boeing recently, the crashes themselves didn't happen that recently, but there were a couple of Boeing crashes that happened not so long ago, and they ended up paying family members. It was somewhere around the neighborhood of $1 million for each plane crash victim on both of those planes. So I'm assuming if Boeing is going to be held liable in the future, you're probably going to see a much larger payout occurring in the future. I mean, not that these family members, they want their they want their family members. They don't want money. But anyway, I just thought I'd throw that out there because, that is a possibility, because when I first heard that, it didn't really sound like a whole lot. I mean, 80,000 British pounds, that's a lot, plus the 20, however much he said, 26,000, give or take. But anyway, yeah, so basically they're investigating, trying to get to the bottom of what's going on. We just kind of have to have patience. I mean, these investigations, they can take a long time, especially if they don't initially find right off the bat what the issue may have been. I'm assuming they're going to let us know if there is something. They pull the flight recorders, they start digging into what they believe was the most likely cause, and if it is, right away, they see exactly what the cause is. Hopefully we'll find out in a pretty short amount of time, but who knows? I mean, I don't even know. It's hard to say really for sure. But anyway, I'll go ahead and hop over here to the survivor. This is the only survivor from the plane crash, and this dude looks relatively unscathed. There was a video. This is just him in a brief interview, but there was another video, which I honestly don't have offhand, of him walking away from the crash site when there was a group of people talking with him, asking him if he was on the plane, and he said he was. He was limping, but he had some marks on his face. His eye looks a little bit swollen. But dude looks otherwise relatively unscathed. I mean, looking at that massive fireball that just ignited when the plane crashed, it is unbelievable this guy survived. It was an absolute miracle. So anyway, I'll go ahead and play it. If they don't explain how it was that he survived, I'll give a quick rundown as to how he did, where he was sitting, and whatnot. So I'll go ahead and give this a play. But first, I'm going to turn this down a little bit because the update that he gave the CEO with India Air was a bit quiet over on X. So, all right, let's give this a go.
A team from the National Transportation Safety Board is headed to India to help investigate the deadly crash yesterday of an Air India 787. And the plane's flight data recorder has now been recovered. But whatever story that recorder tells, it won't be as amazing as the one we heard today.
Get rid of the
from the sole survivor. Anna Corin is at the crash site.
Bloodstains on his
okay, there it is.
Holding a phone,
that's him.
Limps past.
Unbelievable. Dude's walking away from the plane crash, and they end up catching, somebody in the news media ends up catching up with him. I don't know if it was CBS specifically. That's what channel this video's on. But they do catch up to him in the hospital. At least the media does.
Bystander asks in disbelief, were you one of the passengers? 40-year-old Vishwash Kumar Ramesh was the sole survivor of the Air India
freaking
crash
miracle, man.
That killed
that is unbelievable.
People on board, including
I mean, the
his
whole
brother.
world has to be shocked that this dude actually walked away from this.
Escape, Ramesh was visited in hospital by the Prime Minister, and during
oh wow,
a
Prime Minister Modi showed up.
Described how he walked away from India's worst aviation disaster in decades. I thought I was going to die, but when I opened my eyes, I realized I was alive, he said. He explained that the emergency door he was sitting next to was broken, so he climbed out through a small space and escaped.
Yeah,
Here
that's
at
the
crash
gist of
site,
it.
forensic teams are on the scene, officials are arriving, ambulances are here. We're getting reports that there are multiple pieces of body parts littered throughout the wreckage,
Yeah,
and that it
it's
will
horrible.
take DNA testing to know the final death count. Any comment from Air India at this stage? Anything that you would like to say to the families of the victims?
No, that somebody else will be taking.
This family begged authorities for access to the site. Ravi Thakur hasn't heard from his mother, who served food at the hostel, which the plane ploughed into. She was caring for his 2-year-old daughter. Both are missing.
Oh, yikes, man.
He tells me we have only one hope, that they survive.
Yeah, that's rough. That's pretty bad. But yeah, so he was sitting at a seat where the emergency exit was. He was sitting right next to the emergency exit, and I guess as the plane was in the process of crashing, it must have broke open and he just hopped out. Just miraculous. Absolutely miraculous. Okay, so here's President Trump. He chimes in on the news after he heard of it when somebody asks him during a press conference.
First, the terrible, horrific plane crash in India today. I'm sure you saw the images on TV.
This is 2 days ago.
Your reaction to that first, and will you speak to Prime Minister Modi?
The plane crash was terrible. I've already told them anything we can do. It's a big country, a strong country. They'll handle it, I'm sure. But I let them know that anything we can do, we'll be over there immediately. But it was a horrific crash. It looks like most are gone. They actually maybe have a couple survivors, which is just heard. But that was a horrible crash. Nobody has any idea what it might be.
Yeah, not
I gave
yet.
him a couple of pointers. I said, maybe you'll look at this or that. You know, we saw the plane. It looked like it was flying pretty well. It didn't look like there was an explosion. It just looked like the engines maybe lost power. But boy, that is a terrible crash. It's one of the worst in aviation history.
Yep, that was pretty bad. That was pretty bad. I believe it's the worst plane crash that's happened, you know, as far as the number of victims are concerned. I read somewhere in the last 10 years. It's been about 10 years since there's been one that bad. Not sure if that's 100% accurate or not, but that's what I heard somewhere. Anyway, and this video, it's from the Indian Express. It talks about the 6 crew members that India lost, and I just thought I'd just show a little bit of this. So it gives a little details on the people that were on the plane working, including the pilots. Let me see. I think it starts. Oh.
Father quietly dedicated.
Okay, here we go.
Captain Sumit Sabharwal, 60
He's the
years old,
co-pilot.
was at the helm, a veteran pilot just months from retirement. He lived in Powai with his 90-year-old father, quietly dedicated to his duty. According to neighbors, he was just a few months away from retirement and had planned to spend more time at home with his aging father. Sabharwal had been living in Jalvayu Vihar in Powai with his 90-year-old father. Sabharwal leaves behind his older sister who resides in Delhi. Her 2 sons have also taken up the same profession and both are commercial pilots. His death is a shock not just to his family but also to the residential community in Powai where he had lived for many years.
All right, so this is a crew member.
Deepak Pathak had served as a flight attendant for over 11 years. A Badlapur resident known for his gentleness and sense of duty, he never missed calling home before a flight. He did the same that day, not knowing it would be his last. The family had hopes in the initial moments after the crash. They said, and I quote, his phone was still ringing. We thought maybe he was safe. Not speculating until confirmation came from the authorities.
अभी सर क्या है मालूम है उनका जो ड्यूटी था वो ऐसा था कि कभी आता है कभी जाता है उनका ऐसा प्रोसीजर था.
So they don't have English captions here, so I'll go ahead and skip to the next. Oh, here, hold on. Let me go back to the name.
हम लोग खड़े हैं.
Another crew member.
Roshni Rajendra, 27-year-old, was building a name for herself in the skies and online. With over 54,000 followers on Instagram, she was living her dream. Her uniform was a matter of pride in Dombivli. Her loss, a wound felt by thousands. Roshni's parents and brother rushed to Mumbai airport when they got the news. She lived with her parents and brother in the new Umia Krupa Society in Dombivli East. Her relatives described her as a bright and intelligent young woman who achieved what she aimed for once she finished her education. In her neighborhood, her Air India uniform was a matter of pride.
This will be the third crew member.
In Manipur's Thobal town, heartbreak gripped the family of 21-year-old Naktoi Sharma, a cabin crew member on the ill-fated Air India flight that crashed en route to London. Just hours before the tragedy, Naktoi had called her elder sister to share that she would be flying and wouldn't be able to speak until her return on June 15, a call that turned out to be her last. Her father, Nandesh Kumar Sharma, recalled the moment of devastation when only a few hours later, his older daughter came running in with panic after seeing news of the crash. The middle of three daughters, Naktoi joined Air India, her first job in 2023 when she was just 19. Her job would keep her on the move constantly, and she lived in Mumbai with a group of other young women from Manipur who work in Air India.
संपर्क करने के लिए कोशिश तो की, लेकिन उनका मोबाइल भी अभी चल रहा है, रिंग चल रहा है, लेकिन ना अब तक भी नहीं मिला है.
Another crew member.
A 24-year-old flight attendant from Nava village in Panvel was among those feared dead in the plane crash in Ahmedabad on Thursday afternoon. Villagers gathered at the house of Maithili Mureshwar Patil after news of the tragedy started dominating news headlines, with most recollecting the hard work she put in to pursue her dreams in the aviation sector despite coming from a humble background. She landed a job at Air India and had become a source of inspiration for countless young girls in Nava village and beyond.
This might be the last crew member, maybe.
Sayanita Chakravarti, fondly called Pinky, had recently joined Air India after years with Go Air. A Juhu Koliwada native and Mitibai College alumna, she worked hard to make it in aviation. Her childhood friend remembered her with one word: dedicated.
बहुत दुख लगा मेरे को, रोने को आया. मैं नेबर है उसकी, 25 साल. वो स्कूल जाती थी जब से हम लोग पहचानते हैं उसको.
That's horrible. Tragic. So yeah, those are the 6 crew members. They didn't have anything on the pilot, so I don't know if maybe there just wasn't enough information disclosed. I'm honestly not sure. I don't know why they wouldn't show the pilot. I mean, they did show the co-pilot. So anyway, I'm going to move over here to this video where they go over a little bit of information of what may have caused the crash. So I'll play a little bit of this and we'll see what they have to say. This is on Swiss 001. And
now it's
let's
been
give
over
this a
48
shot.
hours since
what everyone
India
gets wrong
Flight
about Air India Flight
171
171 crash.
In Ahmedabad in India, the first ever 787 crash and the first full wide-body crash for over 10 years. We see the 787 take off from Ahmedabad's runway 23, taking off on its way to London Gatwick, 9-hour flight with 242 souls on board. But the flight would only last 30 seconds. The plane departures reaches a few hundred of feet until it loses altitude again.
It was somewhere around the neighborhood of 600 feet.
A hostel right before the city of Ahmedabad. Everyone on board except of one passenger killed, many people on the ground. Right now the death toll is 270. Now, just hours after the crash, I made a video about this incident where I expressed my confusion about this crash. So this is a wide-body airliner that doesn't just fall out of the skies. Here we see the other clip that I was showing in yesterday's video. My biggest interest was in the so-called rammer turbine, which was somewhat noticeable here in the video clip. The rammer turbine is this small propeller that comes out of the 787 fuselage just behind the landing gear that doesn't provide power for flying, but it spins and provides electricity to power the flight controls and the hydraulics a little bit, as well as
That's
the
what I
electronics,
heard too.
of course. And it's something that's definitely also audible in this clip. We can hear a propeller.
Yeah, you can hear a propeller
Spinning. That is for sure. Almost sounds like a little turboprop airplane, just like it does here in this clip. Hear it? Very much the same
very
sound.
noticeable.
Now, the reason why that was such a significant remark for me is that it indicates that both engines are lost. See, this
Right.
rammer turbine comes out automatically in a dual engine failure.
Yep,
which is
automatically to
why
provide
I so
emergency
confidently
power
say
for the
dual
controls in the
engine
cockpit.
failure. But the interesting thing is, under my video, there were 5,000 comments that significantly state other opinions and hypotheses.
Well, of
many
course,
which
man, it's
I
the
do
internet.
not agree to. So now we have new information, and I want to give a clear picture of this. So let's talk about the things expressed under my videos. Number 1. Pilots forgot about flaps. I think one of the most talked about things with this
I
crash
doubt that.
are the flaps
My
setting
opinion.
on this plane. It's true. For nearly every aircraft, you want
Maybe,
the flaps
but I
to
doubt
be
it.
out somewhat in order to help your plane gain lift sooner. Before takeoff, you decide which flaps configuration is supposed
I mean,
to
look,
be.
I don't know if I'm going to end up being right or not, but I have a feeling it could have been a loss of hydraulic pressure if the flaps were the cause of why the plane went down. Maybe there was just a loss of hydraulic pressure, which I believe may have been, if that were to have happened, maybe the engines would have lost power too. So maybe the hydraulic pressure may have not been the primary cause, unless there was something busted in the hydraulic lines or something.
Set,
Not
for
sure,
example,
but
5 degrees. See, before takeoff, you do the
I mean,
performance
everybody's speculating
calculations,
at this
of
point.
course.
It's only
Here
been 2
we
days.
select flaps 5. We select the airport, select the runway, and especially enter the weather. Now, one big thesis that people are expressing is that the plane took off without any flaps at all. And I kind of get that point. In most camera angles, the flaps don't really seem to be down much at all. We see very flat wings. And I kind of understand the idea. Something you can definitely tell about this crash already is that the plane used literally almost the whole runway here on takeoff. It was very obvious that the
that's
plane was
interesting.
struggling to take off anyway, but I don't think the idea that the pilots took off without flaps is plausible at all. I mean, here
No,
we
why
are
would
in
they
the
have
same
wanted to either?
configuration as the airplane. 242 souls on board, lots of fuel on board, and we're going to take off with
Yeah,
flaps 0.
completely full of fuel.
Do you hear this? This plane doesn't like it. Yes, in
Right.
most modern airliners, you have a takeoff configure warning. Even if the pilots were to neglect the checklist, forget about the flaps, the plane would
Alarms.
really warn you about this. Now, yes, of course, it could be that this alarm could be broken and you wouldn't be able to hear the airplane complain about flaps 0, but once again, not very plausible at all. But rather, the reason why the plane used the entire runway for takeoff is because of weather. See, here we're taking off, and this plane is not liking taking off at all. Why? Because the weather isn't very flying friendly at all. At the time of crash, around 38 degrees Celsius is reported.
Oh, yikes,
Extremely
that's hot.
Also, we've got very, very low air pressure, 1,000 millibars. This is what we're simulating here as well. Very low air pressure, very high temperature, and that is poison for
1,000
flying
millibars
because
was
there is just
average.
not a lot of
That's
air
what I thought.
in the air. These GNX engines don't really have a lot of substance to work with anyway, which is why even here in the flight simulators, which is always using a little bit less runway than normal, we're using the whole runway. But come on, take off. There we go, that kind of worked, even though, by the way, our flaps are at 0 degrees. This is why in my video, I never really talked about the flaps position, mainly because I thought even in this weather and even with this weight configuration on this runway, it wouldn't make such a difference.
Okay.
Thesis number 2.
So it still would have
Pilots
taken
pull
off
the
without
wrong handle
flaps.
after takeoff. Now,
Apparently.
another big thesis that is also flaps related that I see people say is that the pilots accidentally put up the flaps after
It's interesting
departure.
he's running
here we
all
are
this through
yet
a
again in the
simulation.
same configuration. We're taking off, and now once we achieved positive rate, instead of the
Well, he
first
got taken off
officer
quick.
putting up the landing gear to retract that, the first officer
Right.
retracted the flaps to the up position like this. And that's why people say the plane lost lift. But as you can see, I mean, take this with a big grain of salt. The flight simulator is not like real life at all. Doesn't really make a big difference. Although it is true, in pilot training you learn very quickly that you cannot retract a lot of flaps at the same time because you will lose lift. But still, this is not, I didn't think this happened at all, mainly because the flaps theory is completely debunked in a way. I mean, here we see the slats being out, which is the flap that come out on the leading
right.
edge of the wing. As you can see, they're coming out here. Here's another part of the wing with the Alpha November Bravo registration visible. This picture right here shows the flaps are in some sort of configuration as well, although I'm not really able to confirm it. But yes, flaps, not really an issue at all. And I'm a little bit, pissed off about this because people say pilot error all the time. The pilots pulled something falling
that's
accidentally, and the plane crashed therefore. And I don't believe.
yeah, I've been reading that a lot too. That's what most people are saying, especially the day that it happened. Everybody was saying it was pilot error, pilot error. So, I mean, people are going to speculate immediately.
That happened at all, and it's a shame for the pilots to be blamed prematurely.
Exactly.
Now, something that people
honestly,
paid
we
close
just don't
attention
know.
to was, of course, the landing gear of the plane after departure. See, normally after rotation, the landing gear is being put up after, like around 9 seconds or so. So right there, and it's very obvious the landing gear was not put up here, which is, by the way, why people were saying that the pilot might have not put the landing gear up, but the flaps accidentally, which would be a weird accident. But here's something that I noticed. Look at this picture closely.
Especially if they've been pilots for a while.
And I want you to take this with a big grain of salt again, because it might be completely wrong. You can see the landing gear being tilted forward somehow, which is obviously not usual for the 787. The landing gear tilt is backward, just like it is here. And from no matter what position, it will look somewhat backward. Though here it probably doesn't. What's interesting about this is when we look at the gear swing of the 787. This is what it looks like when the 787 landing gear retracts. Wait for it. Gear selected up, takes a bit of a while, and gears tilted forward as much as the landing gear door opens. And this is very interesting information. Why? My hypothesis is that the landing gear was actually set to the up position, but during the retraction of the landing gear, the plane lost hydraulic power. Now, the major way for that to happen is through a dual engine failure. Now, why is this important? Because it helps us answer the question of...
That's what I also meant by if it lost hydraulic pressure, it was most likely because both of the engines lost power, because I did read that somewhere. But that was my first thought when they were talking about the flaps not working. Maybe it lost hydraulic pressure. And then I also heard what he just said with regard to the engines just not performing after takeoff.
For
that
example,
they just failed.
My mistake in my previous video is that I assumed the engines failed somewhat when the plane was on the ground before it actually took off. But because of the landing gear being stopped from retraction halfway
maybe they were just too far down the runway to stop at that point.
Now,
I mean, that's possible.
After departure, indeed, maybe 8, 9, 10 seconds, and this is when the airplane lost power. Now that's very obvious as well, because otherwise the plane wouldn't have climbed as much as it did anyway. Now in my video, my biggest question was, how can two modern GNX engines fail at the same time? And that is what I'm pretty sure the investigators are focusing on most. Just yesterday, the order was signed by the Director of Airworthiness here of the Indian Directorate General of Civil Aviation to do an enhanced safety inspection by tomorrow of all the things that can affect the engine, whether it's the fuel parameter, the cabin air compressor system, the electronic engine control system, the fuel pumps, oil system, and the hydraulic system, to maybe find a common flaw in the 787 fleet of Air India. Perhaps this advanced safety inspection that they're carrying through will be quite a big puzzle piece to finding out what might be wrong with the 787
Well, and
fleet.
plus the plane wasn't traveling at like 500 miles an hour either, so hopefully a lot of this equipment is recoverable enough to really do a good analysis on. I mean, there's been other plane crashes where they were up at cruising altitude and they go down and the whole plane just gets obliterated. And I'm sure they still have ways of piecing it together like a puzzle. I mean, they've certainly done that in the past, but hopefully there's enough of it intact for them to more efficiently and more importantly, more quickly try to determine what did exactly happen.
Indeed. For something that can be ruled out, that I said yesterday, is definitely a bird strike. That's what I said. Something that could have happened is a dual engine failure happening from the bird strike, although those must have been very big flock of birds. Although here, you're not able to see anything. No smoke, no compressor stall either. These engines seem to have gone out without any visual defect, which is why most people now suggest that there might have been fuel contamination going on. Now, the flight simulator does actually simulate what happens if water, for example, were to be in the fuel. Very bad news for engines indeed, because they just end up failing. Here in the flight sim, we've got no power at all. Now, while it is true that when water is in the tanks, the engines fail quite quickly. After all, kerosene floats on water, so that means pretty immediate failure of engines. It can take a bit of a while for water to actually enter the engines indeed. Something that very much fits to that claim is
the
some of
loud
the
bang.
eyewitnesses that we have to, of course, also take with a grain of salt. But lots of people reported a loud bang. That's something that's said by bystanders.
I was going to say, I think the survivor said that too.
Of the plane. It is very much a shame that we don't have an audio here on the CCTV footage, but the loud bang could indicate water in the fuel tank after all. The water would create steam in the engines and create a surge spike. And that is what would be a compressor surge. And because water kills combustion, an engine flameout would be possible. So it might not be about the engines, the aircraft, the pilots after all. It might be about poor ground staff handling. Something similar happened 15 years ago on Cathay Pacific Flight 780. The fuel was contaminated, and so half an hour after takeoff at 39,000 feet, the airplane slowly lost 2 engines. The engines stalled. Now luckily, because they were at a high altitude, the pilots were able to reactivate the engine number 2 and land on one single engine. Now one major difference here is, of course, though, that the Cathay Pacific Flight 780 lost the engines at relatively different times, and it was a much slower chain of events, whereas the 787 must have lost both engines at the same time. So it might be fuel contamination, but it might have also been maybe an avionics fire. We might know about the Boeing 787 Dreamliner grounding that happened because the plane tended to have a battery thermal runaway, which would cause fire. And an avionics fire would mean a total loss of the system, and that might also be why the rammer turbine came out, or maybe why the pilots could not control the engines anymore. That might be. Maybe the engines rolled back because of an electric signal problem. And the thing is, of course, we don't know.
Possible.
All I do want to say is that I heavily assume that there is no pilot error involved, and the pilots did the right thing here.
I bet they did. This isn't their first rodeo.
Keep the nose up. Normally in pilot training, you learn to push the nose down after an engine failure, but otherwise you might crash. But to keep the nose down in order to have the most gliding distance possible. But in this case, it would have not really been the best scenario. After all, the plane crashed around 1.6 kilometers below the runway at a relatively lower populated area, while still taking the lives of many on the ground.
Thankfully it didn't crash, in any of this heavily populated
glided a bit
area
more and crashed into the actual city of Ahmedabad, which is a more populated area. The only good news we have is that we have one survivor, and I guess we're awaiting updates. Thank you very much for watching this.
Yep, so that's what we got from that video. Very informative. I really appreciate how he ran a couple simulations. Of course, he did mention that simulations cannot be perfectly substituted for real-life situations, and even the simulation he ran, he threw in the correct weather and the fuel and the weight and the number of passengers and everything, and even that still isn't going to, gauge exactly what could have happened, even running that simulation without flaps and things like that. So, that is to be said. And for this one, Air India Flight 171 pilot error, did a piece fall off first? And this one, he goes over the possibility of a piece of debris falling off the plane. I don't know if I actually did a video where I covered this channel or not, or if I just watched it on my own. I probably just watched it on my own. But he is an engineer, and he's got some really good insight into what may possibly have happened, which, of course, full disclosure, we don't know. It's only been 2 days.
New evidence raising controversial questions. Did mysterious debris fall off the plane just as it was crashing? Did the pilots have the wing flaps incorrectly set prior to takeoff? Did the pilots incorrectly retract the wing flaps instead of the landing gear after takeoff?
Which we saw in the simulation. That would have been weird because those two are positioned very different places in the cockpit.
Before we do this analysis real quick, I just need
the
to
flaps and landing gear, that is.
Error that I made in my video yesterday, so I want to correct that here for you.
You know what? I'm glad that he's about to do this because this has been all over the news too. They're showing the seating chart of the plane, and they're showing seat 11A, which is where the survivor was sitting at the time. And everybody in the news, they were apparently showing the wrong seating chart because they were showing a seating chart not for the Dreamliner, but for a different Boeing plane. And he also was showing a seating chart, which I believe I saw that video that he did where he was showing the seating chart that wasn't actually, it did not actually turn out to be the correct seating chart. So he's actually going to show the right one.
Mistakes, we'll go ahead and correct.
And he's also going to point out the incorrect one that the media has been showing.
Chart for the 787, and I showed you where the lone survivor passenger was
Still
sitting
had
in
his ticket.
11A. The only problem is I
They actually had like an old school ticket with the perforated edge on it.
787-8, which is what this plane was that crashed.
I can't even I don't think I've ever had a plane ticket like that before.
Was a 787-9. And so I'm going to show you the correct one now because this pertains directly to our discussion today. So again, I apologize for that, and I hope you will forgive me. Now, I know what you're thinking here. Jeff, man, you're Mr. Perfect, man.
He's not the only one. There were others that were showing the same thing that he was showing too.
There was one time I thought I was wrong.
That's the problem with trying to go over information right after an incident happens.
And it's still the same.
A lot of the information turns out to not be correct.
And it's still pretty much in the same.
Yeah, this is what was being shown in the media.
Circle there, you can see that's where the emergency door was that he likely escaped from. Okay, so the Daily Mail news media website ran this story here today.
Yeah, it's a garbage
and it
website.
says, oh, exclusive. So they're showing this video that everybody's seen, and they're calling that exclusive. Okay. Video shows object flying off Air India plane seconds before crash as expert hails miraculous escape of British survivor in seat 11A. So here in the video, they identified something that they said fell off of the plane just before it crashed down and impacted. And so I guess one of their experts that they were talking to said it was probably one of the emergency exit doors, which I think is preposterous. And so they pointed over here to seat 11A there, and there's your survivor. Now let's look at the part of the video again really close where the Daily Mail and other observers are saying they saw debris fly off the plane here just before it crashed into the ground. So we're going to stop it right here. So there's the plane pretty much getting ready to disappear below our view. And keep in mind, don't get fooled by that depth of field there. The plane is hundreds of yards past that tree right there. And it's also going 200 miles an hour approximately. But so just concentrate on this area right here, and we're going to see what's happening with the part coming off of the plane.
And if that's accurate, man, that's even more miraculous that that guy survived relatively unscathed, that the plane was traveling about 200 miles an hour. I mean, we all know what those seatbelts are like on airplanes, and they don't exactly feel like the type of seatbelt that would keep you alive if you're crashing at 200 miles an hour.
Why it doesn't even make sense to me, but you'll see what I'm talking about when you see the part. There it is, right there.
Yeah, right there. It like flips
how it
up.
Just popped right up there. Okay,
maybe it was edited in.
A plane that has already hundreds of yards past that point, all of a sudden
that's what happened.
You have something here that's moving upward, which is already kind of goes against physics here. So there's the part right there, see it? And it, as we step through it, you can see it's not really doing anything. It's sort of floating in air, which is why I think this is not anything that would have fallen off the airplane. And there's your explosion starting far off in the distance from this point. So what I think happened, I think the plane the wind of it coming real close to somebody's rooftop there sucked something off a rooftop, like maybe an awning or a sheet of plywood or tar paper or something like that. Because this is not something that's dropping.
Reasonable.
Because remember, if the part had fallen off the plane, it only makes sense, folks.
Yeah, it would have just fallen down.
This is one of those
wouldn't have been rising up
here, people. Because if that part had fallen off of the plane and the plane's going down, then the part would be going down at the same rate that the plane is. It would be going down and hitting the ground. It wouldn't be going up from the ground.
I bet he's right.
It would be going down.
That absolutely makes sense.
So that, I think, is
that the wind from the plane may have lifted something off somebody's rooftop.
And it has nothing to do with that lone survivor of the crash.
No,
and this is not the emergency exit door that some people are thinking that this is. They think that somehow this guy took the emergency exit door and threw it off the plane and he jumped out of the plane. That is simply not the case. And not only that, folks, it is physically impossible for any human alive, even me, as strong as I am, it is impossible to open an emergency exit door inside the plane because, first of all, the door is forced against the hull like this. So as soon as that plane is pressurizing and it's going down the runway to take off, it's putting pressure against that door, and no human could pull that away. And so even when the plane
especially with the wind speed, like at 200 miles an hour, try opening up a car door at 200 miles an hour.
Until after the crash or after a safe landing. And when you pull that door inward, it goes like this and goes like that and then out. So it's sort of a complex motion there. It's not something that you can just take and throw it off the plane. That was not the door to the plane.
This ain't Hollywood.
So next we want to address this controversy here. We've been getting a lot of comments, thousands in both directions here since my video yesterday. And so a lot of people out there, about half the internet, thinks that when this plane took off, that the flaps on the back of the wings were set incorrectly. It was a bad configuration. The
That's
other half
all
of
over
you
the
out
internet
there
right now.
think that it was set correctly. So who's right? And why is everybody looking at this differently, especially on shaky, grainy video where you can't really tell? So
Yeah, and I was even reading comments. I don't think any are included. I mean, I didn't read any of this, of course, but there were even some comments I was reading, not from his channel, but from others that I was looking at from shortly after the plane crashed, and people were chiming in who claimed to be pilots, and just based on their handles, they appeared to be pilots, and they were giving their 2 cents as far as the flaps not being set at all, or there were no flaps, and that's why it went down. And someone that I read, they said they were a pilot for like 16 or 17 years, and that was their theory.
I'm going to analyze this. So I want to show you what properly extended flaps look like before the plane takes off. And then I want to show you why it might have been impossible for them to take off in this airplane with bad flap settings on the back of those wings. So here is a Boeing 787-8 sitting at the gate, and there's the rear flaps on the wing, right? So there you can see, and then there's the line there. That makes a gap when they extend out the flaps downward and to create that curvature. So the reason why you have to extend those flaps for takeoff is to add curvature to the wing. It's called increasing the camber. And then what this does is you're actually increasing the surface area of the wing so that it will have lift. And then, so there's that line right there that you would see, the gap, once it starts to extend. Okay, now watch here as the captain starts to set the flaps. See how they went down a little bit there? And see, that's it. That's as far as they go. So they're moving right now. And that's probably a 15-degree setting. But you can see it's a subtle difference. It's not that obvious on the wing. And he's testing here also the slats. But it's not that obvious looking at it, especially if this plane goes flying by you at 200 miles an hour, that you can tell whether these flaps are extended or not. So all of these people that are claiming that they see that the flaps are not extended, I still don't agree with that, folks. The video is not clear enough to tell, because here, sitting on the plane, you almost don't even really notice it. Now, as the plane taxis down the runway, pay close attention to these flaps, because this is what is supposed to happen. This is what it should look like. So you can see how they are extended, and now we go nose up here, and as it lifts up, within 5 seconds of liftoff is when the landing gear should be up. So pretty much right by now, the landing gear should always be up, and it should go up before they do the flaps. So the flaps should still be down because we're not at enough altitude yet, and we're probably not going at enough speed yet in order for air to efficiently flow enough over the wings to give it lift. So you're going to see them close up that gap now, and they will go ahead and retract the flaps. So just keep watching the action on those flaps right there. You can tell that it happens, you know, not immediately after liftoff either. Now, watch this. See, there it is. So now they're retracting the flaps, and you can see it's just such a subtle difference. It doesn't look that much different than it looked 5 seconds ago.
Not enough to see on that video.
He retracted the flaps. So for all of these people that are claiming that a plane flying by 200 miles an hour on an obscure, shaky video, that they can tell that the flaps were set properly or not, is just mind-boggling to me, because I've also seen interviews with other Boeing pilots who've seen the video and said they can't tell if the flaps were set or not. Okay, now look here at both of the wings. In the middle of the wings, you see how you got like those black lines right there? That is that gap that I showed you that I think proves that the flaps are indeed set in the extended position here. Because remember, it's very subtle on these wings. It's not like it's going to be hanging down, flapping like a door. They just stick down just a little bit. And at this distance, you're not going to really be able to see that 15-degree flap angle. And even here on this Boeing 787-8 taking off, look at the flaps after it takes off. You have a hard time even seeing where they are there. Look, see, they're right there. But you have a hard time seeing that they're extended or retracted. You just really can't tell at this point. And this is a crystal clear video shot from across the runway on the airport. Okay, now let's address this very critical point here of, could the pilots have taken off in that plane with an invalid flaps configuration setting? And I think the answer is no, because look, this is what happens if you try to take off and you hit those thrusters there and you're going to take off with the flaps not extended. Now, what you're about to see is in a Boeing 737.
Configuration warning in the Boeing 737.
Yeah, I was going to say, just like the last video with the alarms.
And that'll go off for 4 main reasons. If the flaps aren't set for 1 to 25 degrees, the parking brake is on, or the aircraft is out of trim, and lastly, if the spoilers are extended.
So you heard how loud that alarm was. So I don't think that there's any way that any pair of qualified
unless the alarm was
pilots
broken,
could ever take off on a plane like that,
which it probably wasn't
set properly. Now,
remember, all these planes were.
Of you commented on my video yesterday.
The first Dreamliners rolled out in 2011, so they're not that old.
Let's assume that the plane had the flaps set correctly when it took off, but 5 seconds after takeoff, when you're supposed to retract the landing gear, let's say the co-pilot made a mistake, and instead of retracting the landing gear, he instead pulled the flaps lever, which would retract the flaps, and now you're reducing the area of your wing now, and you're going to lose lift because of it. And that would explain that scenario as well. What do you think about that? Well, here's something that I think that it's not likely they would mistake that, and here's why. When you look at the
location
cockpit here of the Boeing 787, this right here is the flaps control. And so it has a much different feel and shape and location compared to the landing gear control, which is right over
way
here.
up there. Yeah,
a better close-up shot of this in a minute. But they're two different functions. So this one here, you kind of grab it with your fingers, and it just has a tactile clicking at these different locations here. So you would know, it's very obvious. So you would go up to, like, say 15 degrees here on it, and you'd hear those clicks. But the landing gear is completely different. It's very definite. You have to pull on it, and it's got that round shape similar to a wheel. So you can see these are two differently shaped control handles, and you have to operate them differently, and it just seems so unlikely that you would get the two confused. And they're not even right next to each other where you would grab one by mistake either. So yes, I think it is possible that the co-pilot might have screwed up after they took off.
Well, yeah, I mean, anything's possible.
I don't know. I'm just thinking that two knowledgeable pilots like this, it's just so unlikely for that to happen. I think maybe there was some type of a hydraulic problem or something like that right after they took off. Like, supposing they did set the flaps correctly, but what if the hydraulic system failed to respond? Maybe that could be the problem, right? So then when they go to retract the landing gear, he operated it correctly with the right lever, but hey, wait a minute, it's not retracting. Something's wrong here.
Yep.
So I think they may focus in on that as well. And that smoke you see there is not
Certainly
smoke,
possible.
it's dust kicked up at the end of the runway from the
off.
plane. And make sure to keep those questions coming, because this is a great engineering discussion. This is a mystery that really needs to be solved, folks. And if you didn't see my video
I'm pretty
from
confident that it will
on
be.
the Air India crash, check it out right up here.
But yeah, very, very interesting.
And make sure.
Yeah, you can go check out his channel. He's got some pretty good insight into this topic, at least. But that's basically all I got. That's the latest updates, including from the CEO of Air India. And it's still unfolding. They're still investigating. It's still going to take some time. Not sure if it'll take a few days or if it might take a couple of months. I don't think it would probably take that long, because I'm assuming most of the wreckage was recoverable. I don't know about fully intact. I don't think it was fully intact, of course, but hopefully it won't take a whole heck of a lot of time. They've already recovered the black boxes, so they're going through those right now. So hopefully we'll hear something relatively soon as to what most likely or definitively caused the crash. But anyway, that's all I got. See you later.